Should Ukraine be allowed to use Western weapons to hit Russian targets within the Russian border? That's the number one question that's going around right now, and it's a really good question. For those who don't know, since the beginning of Russia's invasion of Ukraine over 2 years ago, Ukraine has been getting weapons from Western countries, whether it is the United States, the UK, France, Germany, etc. And in some of those packages they're getting, they've got long-range missiles or medium-range missiles or just regular missiles. But every single time that Ukraine has gotten those weapons, they came with a little bit of a fine print. At the very bottom, it would say something like, "We're letting you use these missiles with you having the best intent to use them on Russian targets, but they cannot be used outside of the pre-2014 Ukrainian border." What that means is, we're giving you the weapons. You can strike whatever Russian stuff you want, but that original border that was at 2014, you can only strike the Russian targets within that border. So Luhansk, Donetsk, Crimea, all that is fair game. Outside of that, that's a big no-no. And since then, Ukraine has followed that to a T. I mean, they're hitting the outer end of Crimea, which still counts as that pre-2014 kind of border. But it gets to the point in time to where Ukraine's like, look, Russia is now moving all of their targets out of Crimea and deeper into Russian territory. We should be able to hit those targets. And other countries had said no for quite some time, though recently we're seeing other politicians, for example, the French parliament yesterday, some of the leaders said, hey, we think it's about time that Ukraine can go ahead and use their weapons in there. It doesn't guarantee anything, but they put a letter forward. And so Ukraine has not been able to hit any Russian targets within Russia with Western help. And I say that because if you've noticed over the past few months, Ukraine has stepped up a lot on taking down Russian targets, mostly oil depots, oil refineries, and other military targets. But every single time they've done that, there was not a Western weapon used. Ukraine, over the past 2 years, have developed their own technology, whether it is a certain kind of long-range drone, such as that one they used over, 1,200 kilometers, which pretty much was like a regular small little one-engine plane that went through Russian airspace and hit their target. Maybe they're modifying those S-300s, which they are, and we know that they developed their own kind of missile called the Neptune, which is mostly used for water, but they reconfigured a different version of it for the land. So every time that Ukraine's been able to do it, they've only targeted things that, are not civilians. They're always just either military targets or oil depots. Because when you think about it, Russia only has really one way that they're funding their war, and that is by selling gas and oil, granted, at a major loss. I mean, they're selling it 30% cheaper than, or 15% cheaper than what the EU is selling it. And Russia knows that there are people who are willing to buy it, which will make them a little bit of profit. And we're talking about China. So they're still able to make money to help fund this war. But Ukraine knows that if they can stop that, cut the snake's head off, they're able to slow down Russia. So that's why they're hitting all the oil depots and refineries, even though the U.S. is like, hey, if you keep doing this, the price of oil could go up. Doesn't mean it will, could. And we're at the point now where Ukraine has destroyed 14% of what Russia can make, which is a lot of money that Russia is losing, which hopefully means they can't buy as many weapons, either from Iran or from North Korea, and get parts from China. Because they're not buying weapons from China, they're just getting parts to make weapons that are made in China. If that makes any kind of sense. So it comes back to the question of, if Ukraine has been doing a great job on just hitting military targets and oil depots, why wouldn't we give them the authority to only hit certain targets? And that's where we're at. Will the UK, France, or Germany allow Ukraine to do such a thing? And that was the question that was posed to Zelensky, where we're finding out now that talks are officially going on with EU members so that Ukraine could use these weapons. But according to this article, it's not going well. Actually, to quote Zelensky, so far, there is nothing positive. But it doesn't mean that nothing is going to happen. Remember that these countries are really wary. They don't want to be pulled into a full-blown out war. But if you make things kind of beneficial for them, it is a win-win. For example, and this is something that we've talked about before, if Ukraine steps away from, say, hitting oil depots, which could see the world prices of oil and gas go up, and instead they go for manufacturing of these fighter jets, or some kind of plant or military base, or a missile silo, which can make the world a better place, if they can convince those countries that that's what they could do, then you never know. France could say, hey, take our scalp, or the UK could say, take our Storm Shadow, or the US could say, we have our ATACMS over here, or ATACMS, go right ahead and use it on X, Y, and Z. That way they can kind of wash their hands and say, well, we had nothing to do with that. And Ukraine could also stop the Russian war machine. And it's kind of funny because in a way, there's a lot of other questions that could be asked about this in terms of striking Russian targets. Because it also could be the fact that Ukraine may just want to defend their own territory and only hit things right on the border. And that's kind of what we're seeing right now in Kharkiv. For those who don't know what Ukraine looks like, Kharkiv, the state or oblast, is located right on the border with Russia. And in the past week and a half, Russia has put together 30,000 men with tanks, ammunition, artillery from the Russian border town and try to go into Ukraine. And for the good and the most part, Ukraine has stopped it, though we do know in some parts Russia has gotten about 5 kilometers in. But the question is now posed, hey, shouldn't Ukraine be able to take US weapons, UK weapons, French weapons, German weapons, and fire right over the border into that whole staging area so they could stop that attack before it happens? In the current agreement, no, they can't do that. But there should be some kind of leeway there. Because if Ukraine could stop that attack before it happens, then they don't need to use as much ammunition, which is cheaper down the line and saves ammunition for other attacks. Like we know that Russia is trying to get ready to do something in Sumy, another border issue that could be there. And so those are kind of talks that are going on behind the scenes. Now, Lloyd Austin, the U.S. Secretary of State, was actually asked by that from a journalist who said, quote, could Ukraine use the U.S. air defense system to shoot down Russian planes attacking Kharkiv from the territory of the Russian Federation? So imagine, they're talking about aircraft that are taking off that are coming from that area in Kharkiv, from Russian airspace, coming in to bomb Kharkiv and leave. Those targets should be allowed, especially because what Russia's doing is they only allow them to place. They actually don't fly them into Ukraine. They fly them up to the border where then they launch them and then they leave. Those should be fair targets. And this is what he said. Our expectation is that they continue to use provided weapons on targets inside of Ukraine. The aerial dynamics are a little bit different, but I don't want to speculate. So it's an answer, but not really. Realistically speaking, look at these, let's say Caspian Sea, but Sea of Azov, for example, okay? We'll say that one. Where Russia launches all of their ballistic missiles or other kinds of missiles. They fly them over the sea and they launch them. You could kind of say that's international airspace, but they're taking off from a Russian side. Are those fair targets? Because if they're fair targets, then the ones that are over Kharkiv, or at least aiming towards Kharkiv in the Russian territory, should also be targets that Ukraine can hit with Western weapons. As you can see, it gets very complicated over time, which still leads to the question of, should Ukraine be allowed to use these weapons in Russia? Now, my honest opinion, yes. I think these past few months have demonstrated that Ukraine can be very responsible when it comes to these weapons. They're not just going to take them and hit Moscow or hit all these other crazy buildings that they shouldn't be hitting. They're really proving to the world that, hey, if you give us this power, we will hit only things that we deem as, hey, this is bad if this continues, or if we cut this off, this will stop that. But this is where I pose my question to you. What do you think should be happening? Do you think that Ukraine should have the authority to fire into Russian targets within Russia? Let me know in the comment section below. Like I said before, I'm a big believer in that Ukraine has proven to this point that they can be trusted to do the right thing in these circumstances. Yesterday we've seen, or 2 days ago, we've seen Ukraine take down Russian airports or Russian military airports and airplanes, and sunk 2 ships, a minesweeper and a cruise, I think that cruise missile carrier, I think that's like the last one in the Black Sea Fleet. So in a way, every single time that Ukraine makes the right decision, they're getting rid of stuff that could have been really bad for the world. And in a way, they're making the world a better place while also slowing down Russia. Because remember, Russia never expected that Ukraine was going to get more Western weapons. That's why they started doing these other offensives, thinking, oh, we could push right through them. Then they got that supply chain up and running, and now Russia really isn't going anywhere. I mean, in the past week alone, they lost about 8,500 men. I think we're only about, 4,000 away until there's been 500,000 men lost on the Russian side. So once again, let me know what you think in the comment section below, and if you haven't done so yet, please go ahead and subscribe, turn on notifications, and give this video a thumbs up. I'm Joey. I'll see you later. Bye.